Who's running this show?
Okay, we're back for the last 20 minutes.
Never get between people and their drinking.
Okay, we saved the suit for last. And he's telling me at least he's wearing jeans. I threatened to take his jacket off and snip it up with scissors if he wore one, and I compromised. I decided to meet him in the middle. We have Owen Mahoney. Owen it's funny, I always think everybody knows everybody. Owen is a longtime game guy, and I'm going to let him give you his background. But CEO of Nexon, which is the biggest company you've actually never heard of, and you may have heard of it, but you really don't appreciate how big this company is.
I've heard of it.
So to lead in, Owen,
yes,
can you tell us, just start your journey, roll back a few years before you even, realized that you were going to ever work for Nexon. How did you get there? Like, what did you do before? How did you get there? What was Nexon when you found it?
Well, very long story, very short. I worked in the beginning of the internet. I started my career at Apple in Japan, and then I ended up at a company, early internet company you might remember called Pointcast, which was a massively failed company, but something good came out of it when I was running Asia Pacific for them, and I met Jay Kim, the founder of Nexon. And they wanted to be a diversified media company, and they had this little guy in the corner, working on a PC that looked like he was playing a game. Turned out that game was Kingdom of the Winds, which was the first MMORPG. So long before World of Warcraft, long before Ultima Online, there was a game called Kingdom of the Winds, first graphic MMORPG in Korea. And so that was the mid-90s. And I ended up at Electronic Arts in late 2000. By that time, EA had spent about $400 million developing what they called EA.com. It was a very insightful idea. They were in the packaged goods games business. They knew that the internet was going to change everything. They didn't quite know how. And so they had spent a lot of money on that. Nexon, by that time, I went back and met Jay and the team again. I think Min might have been just about there at that time, who's in the audience today. And by that time, Nexon was the #2 game company in Korea, and had just started experimenting with free-to-play. And it was before anybody had done free-to-play before. And I was 3 months into my time at EA, and I wrote an email on the way back to San Francisco saying, I've seen the future of online games, and it is Nexon. And the executive staff at EA at the time basically threw me out of the room and said, get out of here, rookie, come back when you know something about online games. Jay turned me down to buy the company at that time. EA definitely didn't want to buy Nexon at that time. About midway through my time at EA, which would have been about 2006, Nexon had continued to grow at about a 35% clip. I tried to buy Nexon at that time. Jay again turned me down. And then right before I left in 2009, I tried to buy the company again. There was rumors that Disney was looking to buy Nexon again. This is when I was running corporate development at EA. But each of the times, what really blew me away about Nexon was its ability to just playfully innovate around a bunch of ideas. They were making games that didn't look like what EA was making at that time, but they were amazingly innovative. So first graphic MMORPG, first free-to-play game. They looked on the surface pretty simple, but they were incredibly deep underneath, and that's been Nexon's history the whole time. Each of the times that I tried to buy EA, Nexon invited me over to join, and I ended up joining in 2010.
So speaking of selling Nexon, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. So Jay Kim at least has been reported in the media as being interested in selling his stake in Nexon, and that's kind of morphed into speculation about Nexon itself being for sale.
Yep.
Can you at least kill the elephant in the room so we can move on with the rest of this interview?
Well, I can't actually talk about it. Sorry. I think it's generating a lot of interest because we're a $15 billion market cap company. If the rumors end up being true, it'd be one of the biggest media deals of the year, one of the biggest media deals of the decade anywhere in the world. So it's a very big deal, so there's a lot of interest in it. What I can say is that the management team and everybody in the company is full speed ahead on our plan. And it's a very aggressive plan, and we're very excited about it, but we're not changing a thing about how we're running the company at all, no matter what happens with our shareholders. Jay currently owns about 47% of the company, so it's a very big stake. The other thing that I can say is I've been getting a renewed education on how much you read in the press is actually not true. So let's start at 50% and move up from there. So that's what I can say.
So let me
Someday this will all come out. Maybe next year at this time, and we could do a presentation on the stuff that wasn't true that you read about in the press.
I'd like to put 15 billion in perspective because Take-Two is about a $12 billion company. Ubisoft in dollars probably 13. Activision in dollars probably about 30. So 15 is a big deal.
Yeah.
And one other just perspective, when EA.com, I am really sad to report I've been doing this for 20 years, so I actually remember all these stocks back then. When EA was doing EA.com and Jeff Brown was telling everybody how great it was, the stock actually hit 70 in 2002, and it hit 78 a few months ago. So here we are 17 years later, and EA stock has gone up a whopping $8. The market's gone up about eightfold. So now they've had ups and downs in between, but Nexon has gone from way under $1 billion back when you started talking to them.
Well, when I joined, it was right before the IPO in 2010. Our IPO was in 2011, but I joined in 2010, and we did about 650 million in revenue or so a year. We're about $2.5 billion in revenue, and it's 3 or 4-fold, and our profit has tracked up with it, so it's 3 or 4 times.
So tell me, what's the formula? I mean, so you just took us forward 9 years or 8 years. What's the formula? How do you go from 650 million to 2.5 billion? What do you do right? What assets do you have? How do you milk them? What do you do?
Well, our biggest game is a 12-year-old game that is the biggest PC game in China and has continued to be the biggest PC game in China. Our second biggest franchise, Maple Story, is about 15 years old now and has continued to grow. In the most recent quarter, Maple Story grew 67% year over year and has been just on a tear. Cartwriter, another very old game of ours, has been doing very well recently. So I'm not sure if it's a formula, but the thing that we do, I think, as well as anybody on the planet, and we've been doing longer than anybody that I'm aware of, is making an existing online game last and grow for a really long time. And it's maybe, of all the things that we could talk about in a conference like today, we can talk about, we get asked all the time still about VR and esports and cloud gaming and those sorts of things. It may be the most boring thing to talk about, but I can tell you when it comes time for earnings calls and I have to meet with investors, telling people about growth and profitability is not boring at all. So it's we have several thousand people who I would consider to be among the very best at just focusing on this idea of making an existing online virtual world, getting people to come back and keeping them entertained. The best analogy we've been able to come up with is Disneyland. And Disneyland, has been around for 60-odd years, and somehow they find a way to keep all of us coming back over and over again. And they do that by renewing the environment, by keeping it relevant to a world that has cell phones and all sorts of social media. And that's what we do. That's what we do. Some things better than others. That's something we do really well.
So without giving away trade secrets,
sure.
What do you do to keep people coming back? What do you? How do you engage them? How do you keep them engaged tomorrow versus a month from now and a year from now?
It's like 1,000 things, but our team.
We have time. We have 11 more.
We've got 11 minutes and 21 seconds. Our teams are really obsessive about game balance in the virtual world and making sure game balance is done right and tuning is done right. They're very obsessive about content development plans to make sure. So they'll plan out, quarters and years out of what their content plan needs to be. When they launch a game, they're thinking very much not about the launch date, but they're thinking about a year and 2 years ahead, and we've gotten better at that over time. And live game operations is frankly a very, very difficult job. It's kind of thankless. It tends to call you, you tend to have to get up in the middle of the night to solve some problem. You have to do a rollback. When you do a rollback of let's say you get a buggy piece of software, you end up having to make sure that everybody gets compensated who bought items in that generation. So it's a lot of nitty-gritty about making sure that people's experience continues to be well done over time. And now what we're doing is adding a lot of AI to the process. We've had a very quiet but we've become increasingly convinced that AI is going to change our industry, especially in live game operations. So we're doing more and more of that. But it's really a hands-on craft business of people who really care about the game world, and they focus on delivering a user experience to an online game player that will make them come back. And more than anything, it's a mindset. And that sounds super easy to talk about and like, oh yeah, I can have that mindset. It's actually an execution. A lot of people don't want to do that job who work in video games, or they don't really think about it that way. They think about new games, or they think about just customer support. But it's not about customer support. It's about making an online virtual world a place worthy of coming back to. Again, the best analogy being Disneyland.
Can you give us 100 or 200 examples of how AI is used, or maybe one or two? Just to make it relevant. I mean, saying AI, it sounds like a buzzword.
Sure. So, the context for this is so much. We've noticed. Well, let me back up. You sort of said Nexon is the best kept secret in games. We're trying for that not to be the case, but I think the reason why is because we focus on a lot of stuff that is not considered the sexy part of the industry. If you look at Dungeon & Fighter, it's certainly not at the bleeding edge of graphics fidelity, but tens of millions of people play it around the world. We focus on live game operations. So with that as context, we think about, people ask us about VR all the time, or they ask us about, the latest cliche or fad that's going on in the video games industry, and we kind of poo-poo a lot of them. One thing that we are dead serious about is AI. And so we think it's going to revolutionize everything, but it's not necessarily going to be about the most obvious stuff. So in live game operations, AI is seriously changing how we do things. And we spent about a year and a half essentially wiring up all our live online games with tools that come to us from places like Google and elsewhere that are very, very good, easily procurable, kind of like you procure AWS with a few clicks, basically. And then they can be used for making a game last and grow for a long time, or monetizing better, or advertising better. So one example would be, you're an FPS player, right? So you play FPSs. So when you get into a new FPS, you don't really know how to play the game yet. And then you get match made.
That would even be an old FPS.
An old FPS. And then you get match made with a server full of 15-year-old Rambos. And then they terminate you.
By the way, I call them little girls. That's, if you want to get to them. Sorry, little girl, when they call you old man. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
What? We're getting a little too personal.
No, it pisses off the 15-year-old.
Okay.
15-year-old boys do not like being called little girl.
Oh,
but
sure.
That's what we get back when they bully you. Okay, sorry.
I might use that one. So anyway, so you get in the game and you're getting terminated, and that's no fun. So it's also no fun for them. It's boring to be stuck in a server with a bunch of people who are significantly less good than you, less skilled than you. It's no fun to be in a server with people who are much better than you. So it's a matter of matchmaking. Matchmaking is a big deal in FPSs. People tend not to focus on it too much. But using AI tools, again, off the shelf, we can watch your keyboard and mouse moves and see whether you're a newbie to that game or you're a newbie to all FPSs. Again, within about 15 seconds. And this is in a new entry to a game. And then we can matchmake you with an appropriate server. So you'll be with people who are a little bit better, a little bit worse, and then you're going to have a much, much better time. But that translates directly to money because it's all about retention. And you're likely to stay with that game and not spin out of the game because you've had a good experience. And you keep coming back and having that tuned experience. And we all know as game makers how important tuning of fun is. We sort of make these synthetic flow experiences that keep you coming back because they're just hard enough and not too hard. But now we can apply AI down to the individual layer. And the more data you have, of course, the better you can tune the experience. And because we have a lot of games and a lot of players around the world, we get a lot of data and we can make that work really well. We can also, another example of this is we can use AI to watch your play characteristics. Let's say if you're in an MMORPG, an online RPG, and you've been playing for several years, and then you are more likely to spin out of the game because of your game. We can watch your gameplay characteristic to see within a month you're likely to spin out of the game. And the way we did that before was we'd have really good, sort of tracking of players, and we can put them in cohorts and see, okay, this group of players is likely to track out. But then let's say you're likely to, but we can now bring it down to the individual level. You, Michael, are likely to spin out based off of your gameplay characteristics, and then we can give you a little buff that's going to keep you in that game for a little bit longer. And that's really, really cool. But the especially important thing is if we over strengthen that buff, if that buff is too strong, we're going to make you overpowered, which will make you bored, which will make you quit. And then it'll tick off everybody else because they'll be relatively underpowered. And so tuning that and A/B testing it thousands and thousands of times for every player will allow us to tune it perfectly. And that wasn't possible before AI. And again, these are all off-the-shelf tools, so we don't have to compete with Google and Amazon for the best AI engineers. We can just use the tools that those engineers make and apply it into our games.
Okay, so let's pivot to the future. Where do you see Nexon going in the next 10 years? And what are the greatest obstacles to achieving your vision? So what would you like to see Nexon become, and what's a roadblock in the way of making that happen?
So I personally think, I think all the team at Nexon thinks that we're in the middle of the biggest explosion of technology that has happened any time since the internet, since the dawn of the internet in the early 90s. And it's such an exciting time. I mean, I know you have the Google team here, and they're making a lot of noise. Amazon's going to make a lot of noise, so is Apple. As game developers, we're very, very lucky right now. I've never seen anything like it. We've got this huge palette built by tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investment capital. And what is plentiful as a result of that? Well, technology is plentiful. Again, we use some examples about AI. I've never seen anything like it. I'm blown away by the immediate impact that AI has had on our business. Platforms are incredibly plentiful now. There are no less than 6 companies all trying to be the Netflix of games. I frankly don't know why you'd want to be the Netflix of games, but they're going to do it. And they're all competing, and they're all kind of starting at a standing start at the same time. So lucky us as game developers. And money is clearly very plentiful right now. It's unbelievable to me how much investment capital is available against good ideas. But what is scarce? We think that being able to manage an online game experience for a very long time and make it grow is incredibly scarce in the industry around the world. And the ability to make a truly innovative game is incredibly scarce. And we all talk about innovation, but a lot of the companies that we see are still talking about the same stuff that we've been talking about in the industry for 15 years, which is graphics and story. But there's so much that comes out of nowhere in our industry, and it usually doesn't have to do with graphics and story. Fortnite being an example, GTA being an example, Minecraft being an example, MapleStory being an example. You know, people go, how the heck did that stuff happen? Well, it usually happens because a small group of people or one person decided they wanted to do something completely different. So when I think about what I want for Nexon, it's the same thing I want for the industry in 10 years. Look, we've got so much on our plate now that we can do, and the only thing that stops us is our willingness to innovate. And all growth comes from innovation. And so we want to, all growth comes from innovation. All innovation, though, comes from risk-taking. And all risk-taking comes from the willingness to fail. From a game developer's perspective, it's actually really hard to risk-take. That's been my experience. You've got the trolls and the bullies on Reddit and YouTube, and if you screw up, they'll just massacre you. And many of the people in this room have been subject to that sort of bullying at one point or another in their careers.
Some of you have bullied me. I know this for a fact.
And it stinks. And then, you know, we could all say, well, it's just the publishers need to have more guts. But I can tell you, I sit in front of investors all the time and boards, and they say, okay, that $35 million you lost on that, how are you going to make sure that that doesn't ever happen again? Well, that's a reasonable question for an investor to ask, but the answer is it will happen again. If you're going to ask me that question, you're in the wrong meeting. So what I think we all need to do, everybody in our industry needs to just have the courage of our convictions, because clearly the party is here in the media and entertainment industry. It's not in linear entertainment, as weird as that sounds to say. We're already bigger, and we're growing at triple the rate in video games. And the best video games, the ones that we all love, come from people who really had the guts to innovate on something pretty significant. So at Nexon, what we want to do, we're very fortunate at Nexon. We generate about $1 billion of cash every year. And we would like to invest that against really cool ideas, people who are really willing to step out. And we have a lot of luxury because 90% of our revenue comes from games that we built well over 5 years ago and that are live. And so, and most other game companies that we're aware of that are not yet focused fully on online, 90% of their revenue, traditional games companies, a lot of them, 90% of their revenue comes from games that they've launched within the last 2 quarters. So it really matters to them whether any game has been, is going to be successful when it launches. A lot of times that's why they end up with graphics fidelity and focusing on genres that are already established. So what we want to do is have the courage of our convictions and really go into games that really push the envelope, because we know that that's where the positive black swans will come from, and frankly the kinds of games that we want to play. And we're going to fall flat on our face a lot of times, but again, we're set up, our P&L is set up, our business model is set up that we are capable of taking those types of risks. And I see it as my job to be sort of the tank for our developers to be able to do that. So we bought Pixelberry about 1.5 years ago. They've got some really cool stuff under development. We just invested in Embark Studios, and we're publishing all the games that are coming out of their studio. That's Patrick Soderlund and his team. He just joined our board of directors. I want him pushing us on pushing the envelope. So we're very focused on the West. We're very focused on some of Nexon's IP. And most of all, we're very focused on taking this great opportunity that we have from our live games and pushing ourselves into the future with new games, especially in the West.
Okay, I'm only a third of the way through my interview, but 20 minutes has come and gone. So we're going to have to stop because I think somebody else is on the stage after us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.